My twin brother wanted the alpha who chose me, but he was already mine. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Before we begin today's story, we have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy emotional BL stories filled with unforgettable characters, powerful twists, and heartwarming journeys, please take a second to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. It only takes a moment. It's completely free, and your support helps us continue creating more original stories for amazing viewers like you. We'd also love to hear from you before the story begins. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always incredible to see how far our stories travel and to welcome new friends from across the globe. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin today's story. The cruelest betrayals don't always come from strangers. Sometimes, they wear your own face. The moment Adrian Blackwood stepped onto the stage, every conversation inside the Grand Meridian Hall dissolved into silence. At 6 feet 3 inches tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that reflected years of discipline rather than extravagance, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who never needed to demand respect because he had already earned it. As the youngest alpha ever appointed to lead the prestigious Blackwood Foundation, his decisions influenced businesses, charities, and communities across the country. Tonight's annual Legacy Selection Gala was more than another glamorous event. It was the night everyone believed Adrian would publicly announce the Omega who would stand beside him as both his official partner and the future ambassador of the Foundation's humanitarian projects. Cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters whispered predictions. Every influential family in attendance had spent months preparing for this single announcement. Standing among them were identical twin brothers, Kalen Ashford and Kieran Ashford. Their silver blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and nearly identical features had made them impossible to distinguish throughout their childhood. Teachers confused them. Friends mixed up their names. Even relatives occasionally hesitated before greeting them. But beneath those matching faces lived two completely different souls. Kieran had always loved attention. He thrived under applause, admired expensive clothes, and believed every opportunity belonged to whoever reached for it first. Kalen, however, found comfort in quieter places. He volunteered at neighborhood youth centers every weekend, organized literacy programs for underserved children, and spent his evenings restoring an old community library that most people had forgotten even existed. While Kieran chased admiration, Kalen quietly built trust. Yet tonight, no one expected those differences to matter. According to every rumor circulating through the ballroom, Adrian Blackwood had shown interest in Kieran for months. Fashion magazines had paired their names together. Social media called them the perfect match. Even Kieran himself smiled with effortless confidence, already imagining the headlines waiting for tomorrow morning. Kalen never believed any of it. He attended only because his mother insisted both brothers should represent the Ashford family. He had no desire for public attention and certainly no expectation of becoming the center of the evening. As Adrian approached the microphone, the enormous crystal chandeliers reflected countless lights across the polished marble floor. He thanked the guests for supporting the Foundation's mission before pausing longer than anyone expected. His calm gray eyes slowly scanned the audience. Hundreds of people instinctively straightened their posture. Kieran adjusted his tie and prepared to step forward. Instead, Adrian quietly walked past him. Every camera instantly changed direction. Every whisper stopped. Adrian came to a gentle stop directly in front of Kalen. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Adrian offered a small, sincere smile that carried none of the rehearsed charm expected from powerful public figures. Then he spoke 7 simple words that would forever change all 3 of their lives. I've finally found the person I've been searching for. The silence that followed Adrian's words was heavier than applause could ever be. Every guest watched as Kalen instinctively looked over his shoulder, convinced someone else must be standing behind him. There was no one. Adrian's calm expression never wavered. Mr. Kalen Ashford, he said with quiet certainty, would you walk with me? The request was gentle, yet it carried enough confidence to erase every doubt in the room. Kalen hesitated before taking a slow step forward, feeling hundreds of curious eyes settle upon him. Kieran remained frozen where he stood, the confident smile that had accompanied him throughout the evening slowly disappearing behind an expression no camera could completely hide. Reporters immediately began whispering to one another. None of their carefully prepared stories matched what had just unfolded. For months, they had connected Adrian's name with Kieran, analyzing photographs, interviews, and charity appearances that now suddenly seemed meaningless. Adrian guided Kieran toward the center of the ballroom without touching him, allowing him the dignity of choosing each step himself. Many of you believe tonight is about selecting a public representative, Adrian addressed the audience. That is only part of the truth. The Blackwood Foundation has always searched for people whose character remains unchanged when no one is watching. A massive screen behind him came to life, displaying photographs that immediately filled the room with quiet surprise. Instead of glamorous charity galas or business conferences, the images showed a modest neighborhood library, children painting colorful murals, volunteers serving meals, elderly veterans smiling during community events, and a young Omega laughing beside shelves of donated books. Every photograph featured Kieran. None of them appeared staged. None had ever been published. Murmurs spread across the ballroom as guests recognized places many had overlooked for years. Adrian continued speaking. For nearly 3 years, I have anonymously supported dozens of community programs across the country. Every quarterly report included one name. Not because he sought recognition, but because people consistently described the same qualities: compassion, integrity, patience, reliability. Kieran's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. He had never imagined anyone beyond the families he served even knew his name. He quietly shook his head. "You must have the wrong person," he whispered. Adrian smiled faintly. "That is exactly what every volunteer coordinator said whenever I asked why they trusted you with their most important projects. They all answered the same way. Because Kieran never asks what he will gain. He only asks who still needs help." The room grew even quieter. Kieran stared at the photographs with widening eyes. He recognized every event. Each time Kieran had declined invitations to expensive parties or networking dinners, he had instead driven across town to repair classrooms, organize book drives, or mentor children after school. Kieran had dismissed those choices as a waste of ambition. Tonight, those forgotten weekends had become the reason the most respected alpha in the room stood before his brother instead of him. As applause slowly filled the ballroom, Adrian leaned closer so only Kieran could hear. "This is not the first time our paths have crossed," he said softly. Kieran frowned, searching Adrian's familiar gray eyes for an answer hidden somewhere beyond memory. Before he could speak, Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully unfolded a faded paper star, its creases softened by time. The instant Kieran saw it, a forgotten summer afternoon from many years earlier flashed through his mind, and for the first time since entering the ballroom, he realized this impossible night might have begun long before either of them understood why. Kieran could not take his eyes off the faded paper star resting in Adrian's hand. The carefully folded edges had softened with age, but one tiny blue mark remained exactly where he remembered drawing it with a borrowed marker almost 12 years earlier. His heartbeat became unsteady as memories that had quietly disappeared beneath the weight of adulthood slowly returned. It had been the annual Summer of Hope Festival, a small charity event held in a public park on the edge of the city. Kieran and Kieran had both been 10 years old, wearing matching sweaters that confused nearly every volunteer they met. Their parents had spent most of the afternoon entertaining donors, leaving the twins to explore the festival together. Kieran quickly wandered toward the carnival games, eager to win prizes and attract attention from the growing crowd. Kieran drifted in another direction until he noticed a boy sitting alone beneath a large oak tree. The boy wore simple clothes despite being surrounded by security guards who carefully kept their distance. He looked lonely in a way that did not match the expensive watch on his wrist or the polished shoes on his feet. Without asking who he was, Kieran walked over carrying 2 paper stars from the children's craft table. He handed one to the quiet alpha with an awkward smile. "Everyone should have somebody to make wishes with," he had said. The boy accepted the paper star after a brief hesitation. "Do wishes really come true?" he had asked. Kieran laughed softly. "Maybe not all of them. But if nobody believes in them, then they never have a chance." They spent less than 20 minutes together, folding paper, talking about favorite books, and imagining the kind of adults they hoped to become someday. Before Kalen's parents called him away, he drew a tiny blue mark inside his own paper star and asked the alpha to do the same on the other one, so they could always remember that somewhere another person was making the same wish. Neither of them exchanged last names. Neither expected to meet again. The memory faded as the ballroom returned around him. Kalen slowly lifted his eyes toward Adrian. "That was you." Adrian nodded almost imperceptibly. "I searched for years after that afternoon, but all I remembered was your first name and the paper star." Kalen struggled to understand how a childhood encounter could survive so many years. Adrian answered the question before it was spoken. "You probably forgot the conversation, but I never forgot how you treated me before you knew anything about my family, my position, or my future. That day was the first time someone chose to sit beside me simply because I looked alone." Across the ballroom, Kieran listened in stunned silence. Every word deepened the invisible distance growing between him and his brother. He had always believed success belonged to whoever impressed the right people. He had never imagined that a quiet act of kindness from childhood could become more valuable than years of carefully building the perfect public image. As guests continued discussing the unexpected revelation, Adrian carefully returned the paper star to his jacket pocket. "I did not choose you tonight because of one memory," he said. "I chose you because every report I received over the last 3 years proved that the boy who believed everyone deserved kindness never disappeared. He simply grew into the man standing in front of me now." For the first time that evening, Kalen understood that destiny had not arrived in a single dramatic moment. It had been quietly walking beside both of them for years, waiting until they were finally ready to recognize it. The gala officially ended less than an hour later, but no one seemed interested in leaving. Every conversation throughout the Grand Meridian Hall revolved around a single unexpected choice. Reporters hurried to rewrite headlines. Guests who had barely noticed Kalen before the ceremony suddenly introduced themselves with polished smiles, eager to shake his hand or exchange business cards. The sudden attention felt overwhelming. Kalen quietly excused himself and stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city skyline, welcoming the cool evening air after the constant noise inside. He rested both hands on the stone railing and watched the lights stretching across the horizon, hoping the silence would slow his racing thoughts. The glass door slid open behind him. For a brief moment, he assumed Adrian had followed him, but the footsteps were sharper, quicker, carrying years of familiar frustration. Kieran stopped several feet away. Neither brother spoke immediately. The distance between them felt much larger than the few yards separating their shoulders. Finally, Kieran forced a quiet laugh that carried no joy. "Did you know?" he asked. Kalen turned slowly. "Know what? Do not pretend you are surprised. Everyone believed Adrian was interested in me. Suddenly he chooses you, remembers some childhood story, and somehow every photograph on that screen is about you. Tell me honestly, when did this begin?" Kalen shook his head. "Tonight was the first time I realized the boy from the festival was Adrian." Kieran searched his brother's face, hoping to find the slightest hesitation. There was none. That only deepened the disappointment growing inside him. "You always do this," Kieran whispered. "You never chase anything, yet somehow people always choose you." The accusation lingered between them. Kalen lowered his eyes for a moment before answering softly. "I never wanted people to choose me. I only wanted to do what felt right." Kieran looked away toward the city. "That is easy for you to say because life keeps rewarding you for it." Before Kalen could respond, another guest stepped onto the terrace and politely informed him that Adrian was waiting in one of the private conference rooms. Kalen hesitated, glancing back at his brother. "We will talk later." Kieran nodded without meeting his eyes. "Go. He is waiting." As Kalen disappeared through the doorway, Kieran remained alone beneath the night sky. A notification suddenly appeared on his phone. It was a photograph posted by one of the Gala photographers only minutes earlier. Adrian and Kalen stood side by side beneath the crystal chandeliers, both smiling naturally. The caption had already gathered thousands of comments celebrating what many called the beginning of an inspiring partnership. Kieran stared at the screen before quietly opening his own photo gallery. Hundreds of carefully staged pictures filled the display. Designer suits, exclusive parties, charity banquets, award ceremonies. Every image had been crafted to impress strangers. Then his thumb stopped on an old photograph taken more than a decade earlier at the Summer of Hope Festival. Two identical boys stood beside a folding table covered with colored paper stars. Kieran remembered that afternoon differently. While Kalen stayed behind to help volunteers clean the park after the festival ended, he had insisted on leaving early because another event sounded more exciting. He had forgotten the day almost immediately. Looking at the faded picture now, he suddenly wondered whether the smallest choices people ignored were sometimes the ones that quietly shaped an entire future. Kalen found Adrian waiting inside a quiet conference room overlooking the river that divided the city. The atmosphere was remarkably different from the glittering ballroom they had just left behind. A simple pot of coffee rested on the table beside two ceramic mugs, and the walls displayed photographs of community projects rather than corporate achievements. Adrian closed the folder he had been reviewing and stood as Kalen entered. "Thank you for coming," he said warmly. "I thought you might prefer a quieter place." Kalen smiled nervously. "You were right. I still feel like none of this is real." Adrian poured 2 cups of coffee before sliding one across the table. "I felt the same way the first time I became responsible for something larger than myself." Kalen looked around the room with curiosity. Framed pictures showed children reading, families planting community gardens, volunteers rebuilding playgrounds, and neighborhood festivals filled with laughter instead of luxury. "These are all projects supported by your foundation?" Adrian nodded. "Some people believe leadership begins inside boardrooms. I think it begins wherever people decide someone else's future matters as much as their own." The words reminded Kalen of the conversations they had shared as children without realizing they were speaking to the same person. Adrian opened another folder and placed several handwritten letters on the table. "These arrived over the last 3 years. Every one of them mentions you." Kalen carefully read the first letter. A retired schoolteacher thanked him for organizing volunteers to repair a neglected reading room. Another came from a single father whose son had regained confidence after joining one of Kalen's weekend literacy programs. A third described how an elderly veteran finally felt remembered after years of isolation because someone had simply listened to his stories. Kalen lowered the letters slowly, his eyes growing. "Emotional. I never expected anyone to write these." Adrian answered quietly. "Most meaningful things happen when nobody expects recognition." After a thoughtful silence, Adrian reached into a small wooden box resting beside his chair. Inside lay another paper star, perfectly preserved beneath protective glass. The tiny blue mark remained visible after all these years. "There is something I never told anyone," Adrian admitted. "When my father passed away, I struggled with believing I was only valuable because of my family's name. I carried this paper star everywhere. Whenever I doubted myself, I remembered one sentence you said that afternoon." Kalen searched his memory. Adrian smiled gently before repeating the words exactly as he had remembered them for 12 years. "You told me that people should never measure their worth by how loudly the world notices them, but by how quietly they improve someone else's day." Kalen blinked in surprise. "I cannot believe I said something like that when I was 10. Adrian laughed softly. "Neither could I. Yet I built an entire foundation around that idea." Outside the conference room, unnoticed by either of them, Kieran had returned after searching the hallway. The door remained slightly open, just enough for him to hear Adrian's final sentence. "The truth is," Adrian continued, "I did not spend years searching for a childhood memory. I spent years searching for proof that the boy who changed my life had become the kind of man I hoped he would be." Kieran quietly stepped back before either of them noticed his presence. For the first time, the feeling growing inside him was no longer simple jealousy. It was the painful realization that the greatest opportunity he believed had been taken from him had actually been quietly built through countless unseen choices he had never valued until it was far too late. The following morning, the headlines spread faster than anyone inside the Blackwood Foundation had anticipated. Every major news outlet praised Adrian's unexpected decision, but what truly captured public attention was not the gala itself. It was the collection of stories that volunteers, teachers, parents, and community leaders began sharing online about Kalen. Thousands of people who had quietly crossed paths with him over the years posted photographs of restored classrooms, neighborhood reading programs, food drives, and charity events where he had never once asked for recognition. By noon, his name had become associated with kindness rather than celebrity. Kalen found the attention deeply uncomfortable. Sitting inside the foundation headquarters, he stared at his phone before placing it face down on the conference table. I never wanted to become the story, he admitted. Adrian looked up from a stack of project proposals and smiled reassuringly. You are not becoming the story. The work is finally being seen through the person who helped make it possible. Before Kalen could answer, his phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Kieran asking to meet for lunch. The words were polite, almost unusually calm. Hoping the previous night's tension had settled, Kalen agreed without hesitation. They met at a quiet cafe only a few blocks from the foundation. For several minutes, neither brother mentioned Adrian or the gala. Instead, they spoke about their parents, childhood memories, and the old neighborhood where they had grown up. The conversation almost felt normal again. Then Kieran quietly slid a tablet across the table. Someone sent this to me this morning. On the screen appeared a series of photographs taken from different charity events over the past year. In several images, Adrian could be seen standing in the background while Kalen volunteered, although the two never appeared to be speaking directly to one another. People online are already saying you secretly knew each other all along, Kieran said. Some even believe everything at the gala was planned months in advance. Kalen studied the photographs with genuine confusion. He remembered every event, but had never realized Adrian had attended as an anonymous supporter. I had no idea he was there, he answered honestly. Kieran searched his brother's expression, trying to find even the smallest sign of deception. Instead, he found only surprise. At that exact moment, another notification appeared across the tablet. An anonymous account had uploaded a carefully edited article claiming Kalen had manipulated charity programs to attract Adrian's attention years before the gala. The story spread rapidly because the photographs seemed convincing when removed from their original context. By the time Kalen returned to the foundation that afternoon, reporters had already gathered outside the building asking whether the relationship had been staged from the beginning. Employees watched the growing controversy with visible concern. Adrian remained unexpectedly calm. He read the article once before quietly setting the tablet aside. People often believe the first version of a story they hear, he said. The truth usually arrives more slowly. Kalen lowered his head. If this damages the foundation, I will step away. Adrian immediately shook his head. No. Character is not measured by how people speak about you during comfortable seasons. It is revealed by what remains true when misunderstanding becomes louder than facts. Standing outside the conference room window, Kieran watched the exchange in silence. He had not written the anonymous article, but he recognized several photographs that only someone close to the family could have collected so quickly. For the first time, he realized someone else had begun using the growing distance between the brothers for a purpose far more dangerous than jealousy. And unless the truth was uncovered, everything Adrian and Kalen had quietly built could disappear beneath a story that was never real. The anonymous story continued spreading throughout the week, but unlike the people chasing sensational headlines, Adrian refused to let public speculation dictate his decisions. Instead of canceling meetings or hiding from attention, he invited community leaders, volunteers, and foundation partners to continue their scheduled projects exactly as planned. Our work existed before these rumors, he told his staff. It will exist long after they disappear. Kalen admired Adrian's composure, yet he could not ignore the growing weight on his own conscience. Every article attacking his character felt like another burden placed upon the volunteers who had trusted him for years. Late one afternoon, while organizing donated books at the neighborhood library where his journey had begun, he noticed someone quietly watching from the entrance. It was Kieran. For several seconds, neither brother spoke. The familiar scent of old paper, polished wood, and afternoon sunlight filled the peaceful room exactly as it had throughout their childhood. Kieran slowly walked between the shelves before stopping beside a reading corner decorated with children's drawings. I used to think this place was boring, he admitted with a faint smile. Now I realize I never actually looked at it. Kalen closed the book he had been shelving and waited patiently. Kieran took a long breath before speaking again. I found something after we met at the cafe. He handed Kalen a small flash drive. The anonymous account that published those photographs was created using a marketing company hired by someone from our family's investment office. Kalen looked at him with surprise. Our family. Kieran nodded slowly. One of Father's business advisors believed Adrian choosing you instead of strengthening a corporate partnership would weaken future negotiations. They wanted public pressure to force the foundation into reconsidering. Kalen struggled to process the revelation. Did father know? No. Kieran answered immediately. I checked everything before coming here. He has no idea. Silence settled between them again until Kieran quietly continued. There is something else I need to tell you. His voice became noticeably softer. When Adrian chose you that night, I wanted to believe someone had stolen my future. It was easier than admitting the truth. He lowered his eyes. The truth is that I spent years trying to be admired, while you spent those same years trying to be useful. I kept comparing myself to you instead of asking what kind of person I was becoming. Kalen felt years of unspoken misunderstanding beginning to dissolve. You never had to compete with me, he said gently. I never saw life that way. Kieran laughed quietly, though this time there was sadness rather than bitterness in his expression. I know that now. That was always the difference between us. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed the old festival photograph they had looked at the previous evening. On the back, written in faded handwriting, were words neither of them remembered seeing before. Their mother had written them after developing the picture many years ago. The world will always recognize identical faces before it discovers different hearts. Both brothers stared at the sentence in thoughtful silence. At that moment, Adrian entered the library, having followed the location shared in Kalen's earlier message. He stopped when he noticed the twins standing together. Kieran walked toward him and offered the flash drive without hesitation. This contains everything we found. Use it however you think is right. Adrian accepted it, but looked directly at Kieran instead of the evidence. Thank you. Kieran shook his head. Do not thank me. I should have stood beside my brother long before today. As the three of them left the library together beneath the warm evening sky, none of them noticed that the greatest victory was no longer proving who had been right. It was discovering that honesty could rebuild what comparison had quietly spent years trying to destroy. The evidence contained inside the flash drive changed everything, but Adrian refused to release it through a dramatic press conference or an aggressive public statement. Instead, he invited the Foundation's board members, community partners, and several respected journalists to a transparent review meeting where every document, email, and timeline could be examined together. The facts spoke more clearly than accusations ever could. Within hours, the anonymous article that had spread so quickly began losing credibility as reporters corrected the record and acknowledged that the photographs had been intentionally presented without their original context. The Foundation's reputation recovered, yet Adrian's first concern was never the headlines. As soon as the meeting concluded, he returned to the neighborhood library where volunteers had gathered for their weekly reading program. Kalen was sitting on the floor surrounded by children, helping them build colorful paper stars after finishing a story about courage and kindness. Adrian quietly watched from the doorway before joining the group without ceremony. One little boy looked up with wide eyes and handed Adrian a sheet of blue paper. Everyone has to make one, the child announced proudly. Adrian laughed and accepted the paper, folding it carefully while the children offered enthusiastic advice. Across the room, Kalen noticed the familiar concentration on Adrian's face and smiled as though 12 years had disappeared in an instant. When the workshop ended and the families returned home, the library grew peaceful once again. Sunlight faded through the tall windows as golden evening light stretched across the wooden floor. Adrian placed his newly folded paper star beside the one preserved inside its small glass case. I think this belongs here now, he said quietly. Kalen looked at the two stars resting side by side. One represented a promise made by children who barely understood the future. The other represented two adults who had chosen to honor that promise through their actions instead of their words. Thank you for believing in me, Kalen said softly. Adrian gently shook his head. Belief is easy. Trust is what matters. Every day you gave people reasons to trust you long before we met again. A familiar voice interrupted their conversation. I owe both of you something. Kieran stepped into the library carrying several large boxes filled with brand new children's books. He placed them beside the reading corner before looking directly at his brother. I spent years chasing recognition. I forgot that the greatest achievements often happen where nobody is watching. I cannot change the past, but I can choose differently from today forward. Kalen embraced his brother without hesitation. There were no grand speeches, no lingering resentment, only the quiet relief that comes when two people stop measuring themselves against each other and begin walking in the same direction. Adrian watched the reunion with genuine respect. He understood that forgiveness was not pretending painful moments had never happened. It was deciding those moments would no longer define the future. Over the following months, Kieran began volunteering every Saturday alongside the same community teams he had once ignored. He discovered that conversations with children, elderly neighbors, and struggling families left a deeper impression than exclusive galas ever had. People gradually welcomed him not because of his family name, but because they saw consistent effort and sincere change. Standing together one autumn afternoon as dozens of children filled the restored library with laughter, the three of them realized the strongest relationships were never built through competition or appearances. They were built through countless ordinary choices repeated with honesty until they quietly transformed everyone involved. 1 year later, the neighborhood library no longer looked like the forgotten building it had once been. Fresh coats of paint brightened the walls. Every bookshelf was filled with donated books, and laughter echoed through rooms that had once stood empty. Families gathered there every weekend. Children discovered new stories, and volunteers from every corner of the city worked side by side, without asking who came from wealth or who came from hardship. The small paper star display near the entrance had quietly become the library's symbol. Hundreds of visitors folded their own stars before leaving, each carrying a handwritten wish for someone else's future instead of their own. Adrian often smiled whenever he noticed another star hanging beside the original two. He believed hope multiplied when it was shared. Kieran continued leading community programs with the same humility that had first inspired him as a child. Although countless organizations now invited him to speak at conferences and public events, he never allowed recognition to replace purpose. Whenever reporters asked him how his life had changed, he always answered with the same quiet honesty. The work is still the same. Only more people have decided to help. Those simple words inspired thousands of new volunteers across the country. Kieran also discovered a new direction for his life. Instead of managing publicity campaigns designed to impress investors, he established a mentorship program that connected young professionals with nonprofit organizations needing creative support. The skills he had once used to seek attention now helped charities reach families they had never been able to serve before. One afternoon, while organizing supplies for a children's reading festival, Kieran found the old festival photograph tucked inside a notebook. Looking at the identical twins smiling beneath the summer sun, he no longer saw a competition that had defined his childhood. He saw two brothers who had simply taken different paths before finally finding the same destination. He quietly framed the photograph and placed it inside the library where everyone could see it. During the annual Summer of Hope Festival, exactly 12 years after the day their lives had first crossed, Adrian and Kieran returned to the same oak tree where two children had folded paper stars together without knowing how deeply one afternoon could shape an entire future. The tree had grown taller, its branches spreading farther across the park, just as their lives had reached people they would never personally meet. Adrian removed the carefully protected paper star from his pocket one last time before placing it inside a glass display prepared for the festival's history exhibit. "I think it belongs here now," he said. Kieran nodded with a peaceful smile. Because it was never only ours. As families walked through the exhibit, a young boy stopped in front of the display and asked his mother why two ordinary paper stars were protected like treasures. Before she could answer, Kieran gently knelt beside him and said, "Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of a story that changes many lives." The boy smiled, picked up a sheet of blue paper from the craft table, and carefully began folding his own star. Adrian, Kieran, and Kieran watched quietly as more children joined him one after another. In that simple moment, they realized the greatest legacy was never about being chosen above someone else. It was about choosing kindness often enough that it inspired others to do the same. And somewhere among hundreds of newly folded paper stars, another story had already begun, waiting for the day two strangers would discover that hope, compassion, and love could still transform an ordinary meeting into an extraordinary future.